Mr. Spring, can you hear us? We're just testing our mics with our IT staff at the back there. Everything's good? Would you like us to test with 1 and 2, or you don't need that? Can we hear from 1 and 2 again? Or 1 and 2 and 5? Just we're just testing the sound one more time.
This is committee room 1 and 2. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
No. Committee room 5 here.
Thank you. And any staff that have joined us, please do not use video. That's reserved for council members, and please ensure you're on mute. Again, a gentle reminder to staff to please mute. Again, a reminder to staff to please mute. Thank you.
Okay, it's just after 4 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order, the 9th meeting of Planning and Environment Committee, and I'll start by saying the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. I will start by seeing if there are any conflicts from committee members. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent items. There are 4 of those. Would anybody like to pull any of those consent items? Oh. Okay, I've got it written down here. So I, myself, am going to pull 2.1, but we can put the other 3, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 on the floor, but I need a motion and a seconder for that. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Turner. Are there any comments or questions about those remaining consent items? Councillor Turner, followed by Councillor Helmer, Deputy Mayor Helmer, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly through you, with respect to the Boulevard Cafe Grant Program, is the intent on that? I didn't quite get it from the report. It might have been in there, but is the intent to grant the entire fee associated with the permit itself, or was there an additional amount or a portion thereof?
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Barrett, I believe, or whoever else wants to answer that.
I believe Ms. O'Hagan can answer that one for you.
Thank you.
Hi, through the chair. So the idea is that the patio fees for all of the sidewalk patios in the downtown CIP area, for 2020, it would cover 100% of the fees, which includes the licensing agreement fee, the permit application fee, and the temporary sound permit fee.
Good, Councillor. Thanks. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I'm wondering through the chair if planning staff could talk about the possibility of extending the grant program into the Old East Village CIP area. I know it's mentioned in the report that there's construction there, but I also know there's differences between the 2 CIPs, the way that they are structured. And I wonder about the ability to extend it into the other CIP area.
Okay, Ms. O'Hagan.
Through the chair. So at this point, we had been advised by legal that there's sufficient policy tie into sidewalk patios in the downtown community improvement plan to have an interim measure of adopting the incentive program through the downtown CIP. Unfortunately, the Old East Village CIP does not have that policy linked to it. I will note that of the sidewalk patios, of the 39 sidewalk patios, we currently have 29 of those are in the downtown. 2 are currently in Old East Village. Once we have the core area CIP in place, we will be able to extend the incentives to the whole area. And the report does also mention that the patio fees for 2020 for citywide will be prorated. So businesses will only be charged for the portion of the year that the patios are open, which will lessen the fees for this year.
Thank you, and through the chair to my colleagues, I'm quite interested in making sure we do everything we can to support the expansion of restaurants in particular out onto public realm so that they've got space to seat as many customers as they can as they're trying to recover. And we have an interesting situation in Old East Village where many of the policy documents related to that part of the commercial corridor are supportive of patios. So when we went through the urban design guidelines for the area, the patios was a issue that was discussed. Certainly, I think the general intent in the secondary plan was to create a public realm that was more supportive of a patio space. The construction project itself is going to create a bit more space in the public realm for those kind of things, and it was designed in that way. And yet we do have the situation, as Ms. O'Hagan has identified, that we really don't have a policy framework to hang this particular grant program on. So there are a few folks, and I would expect the demand for patios, especially out in the public realm, is going to be higher now than it was last year. And I do think we're going to have to wrestle with something on a citywide basis to try and make that as easy as possible. And so maybe it's not through this particular grant program, which sort of by the circumstances of where the CIPs are right now, it needs to be just with downtown. And I certainly support that. I think that's a good program. But I do think we have to think about how we can support it in main streets all over the city, whether they have CIPs or not, essentially as a COVID recovery measure that would be supportive. So I think that's a better discussion to have tomorrow at SPPC, but I did want to raise it here because it is certainly of concern to the folks in Oldies Village, how they can get patios set up and how much they're going to cost and all that stuff. They're very concerned about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I just want to thank Deputy Mayor for raising the issue in his ward, but I really do think we need to look at this as a citywide issue, and I know that's a discussion for another day, but I just wanted to think or to say the importance of it being a citywide conversation is something that I'd be interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner, and then Councillor Kayabaga.
Sorry, I've already spoken, but Councillor Kayabaga could go first and then I can speak up.
Great, thanks, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. I think I concur with what Deputy Mayor Helmer just said. I just had a question around as we are moving forward to create the patios. I wanted to make sure that we also keep in mind, you know, some of the feedback that we've heard from the communities, that we have to also make sure that it's accessible. It's still a very accessible to people who are using wheelchairs, walking, and we just want to make sure that this is something that staff has considered as well. And I think I'll go to through you, Madam Chair, I'll go to Britt O'Hagan to see if she has any comments on that, on the accessibility of extending the patios. And I think I'm not sure if this is going to be on the committee next, tomorrow, but when we are talking about extending what Councillor Helmer just said about the patios, there has been a report, or there's a report to waive the fees. But I just wanted to make sure that as we do all of those things, we're also keeping in mind to make it accessible to people.
So, Councillor, do you mean accessibility of people using the sidewalks where these patios are? Okay, thank you. I see Mr. Barrett has his hand up.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, I'll let Britt speak to some specifics, but I just want to remind the committee that through the Back to Business task force that's been put together, so they are addressing patios, and as you've noted, it's going to be more information on the agenda or part of the discussion tomorrow. This is just dealing with the fees, and it's because it's the fees, that incentive bit, that's why it's tied under the community improvement plan. The actions that council is looking to take to promote the patios as a COVID response and making sure that we make the process as easy as possible for putting these in place, and to address concerns like Councillor Kayabaga, we'll certainly make sure that that's part of the back to business part of it. What's in front of you tonight is just an incentive program around just the fees piece, but we're hearing everything else that you're saying around making these patios happen citywide as part of this whole pandemic response.
So, Councillor, do you still want to hear from Ms. O'Hagan, or do you want to wait for a fuller discussion at SPPC?
We will wait. I don't want to put on the spot, so I'll wait till SPPC. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Turner. Councillor Turner, sorry.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And thanks, Mr. Hagan. I failed to see the part at the end of the the document that did show 100% waiver for it, so that's helpful. My apologies. But specifically in the additional considerations, it says 36 permits were obtained citywide, fees totaling about $27,920, so about $775 per establishment. Is that a fair characterization for those that would be seeing the fees outside of the CIP? And those not in the CIP would also see their fees prorated. Is that correct?
Ms. O'Hagan.
Yes, through the chair. Our Realty Services area has said that they will be prorating the fees citywide, and that is based on patios only being out for half of the season, essentially. And the fees do vary widely based on the size of patios and other factors such as whether they are taking up an on-street parking space. So I can say that some of the fees are as low as $150, and some of them go up to $4,000 per year on the larger scale side. So on average, yeah, I would say most of them fall just below the $1,000 for the season, and that's for the licensing fee only. And I will just make a quick mention to Councillor Kayabaga's one question is that there is an internal team that is made up of planning, engineering, and development services that do review all of the patios, and accessibility is one of the considerations, making sure that we have an unobstructed clearway for pedestrians to walk around the patios.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the consent items?
Thank you.
Okay. Was that a yes, Councillor Turner, or?
Sorry, it was just a thank you to Ms. O'Hagan for her response.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other discussion on the 3 consent items that are on the floor. So I guess I can call the vote since we have a mover and a seconder. So, Councillor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder. You're muted, Mr. Mayor.
Still a yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. And I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so that brings us back to item 2.1, and staff are recommending that we refer this back for another quick look and to allow the senior leadership team to weigh in on this. I also believe that they are working on the consultation engagement program. So knowing that this, that staff are asking us to refer this back, do we have comments or questions on this report? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, if I may, I know it's been, quite challenging in the planning department with applications and policies, trying to move them forward, and given COVID and the challenges, it is something that I want to thank staff. I know there's lots to be done in trying to incorporate, especially public engagement, and that process is something that I want to thank them for being considerate and making sure we're doing everything possible. My question with the referral back is around the timelines to how will this delay the process of the progress reports and that coming back to us, or is that a concern at all, is my question.
Okay, go to staff for that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, we're hoping to actually just get this back on the next cycle. As the chair noted, we're just sending this back. We just want to have another quick review with senior leadership team on this. We have already started the consultation program on this. We had some discussions with the community and with stakeholders before we all no longer were meeting. And part of our consultation program that we're putting together now is how we can have a very thorough and meaningful consultation without the ability of getting together. So that's going to be part of what it is that we're looking at. But all that we are hoping to be reporting out to you at the next cycle. but we have been consulting, and we'll continue to consult as we go forward.
You're good, Counselor. Any other questions or comments? No. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? I was going to say please, and then I got moved by the mayor and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And now I'll call the vote. Councillor Helmer. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I was just muted. Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That takes care of the consent items. We'll move on to the scheduled items. And item 3.1 is a public participation meeting, our first one during the COVID shutdown. So this is regarding 1919 and 1929 Oxford Street West. And I will go to staff to, hold on one second, I'm getting looked at by the clerk. So we can't yet have on-screen presentations. The city staff are working on that right now. So I'll first go to planning staff for a brief synopsis of this application.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. This is Sonia Wise. I'm the planner on the file. This application is for a new service station, takeout restaurant, and convenience store. The site is located in a gateway location to the city at the corner of Oxford Street West and West Elborn. Currently, the site consists of an existing Esso gas station, as well as one adjacent single detached dwelling. The primary vehicular access for the proposal will be from West Elborn, and there will be an additional rights out access from Oxford Street West. The building will face Oxford Street. It's appropriately located on site. It'll frame and activate the street. There's also landscaping proposed along Oxford Street, which will screen the parking area adjacent to the street and provide the sort of treatment for the gateway location. The recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It's appropriate for the site, and it implements the intents of the shopping area place type of the London Plan, as well as the community commercial node designation of the 1989 official plan. The zoning will allow for the service station, the gas bar, and the takeout restaurant uses, and has adequate measures in place to mitigate any impacts from the drive-through, its location, and the site layout. Thank you, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Wise. Are there technical questions about this? So we'll go to technical questions first, and then we'll open the PPM, which I haven't done yet. So, go ahead, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, sorry about that, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to get used to this new way. So when it comes to the technical questions, I have a number of them. I don't know if now's the right time to do it because I may or not. It's a little unusual not having a map in front, and then I can go ahead based on reading the reports, asking technical questions, I guess, and I'll go from there, and you can tell me if they're technical or not. So my first question is around the contaminated soil and the removal of that as it goes through the construction process. If staff could just talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, and through the chair. So what we would require is a record of site condition from the applicant. So they would go through that process. They would undertake the necessary studies, geotechnical or whatever, what have you. And they would submit that and confirm for us that the site has been cleared of any of the contamination. At that point, we would then advance through the site plan process.
And how is that dealt with through the construction process? the soil contamination. So they'll be removing the soil, and then they will be putting in new tanks as well. And the reason I'm asking these questions, because it is near Trip C. This is an area that has lots of water, and just would like to know a little bit more about how that is going to work with the tanks, the new tanks coming in, or is that a site plan conversation and the construction or the route for these, the delivery of the tanks to this site? Because as you know, this is there's Trip C as well as a large residential area here as well. So want to know if there's plans in place now, or is that dealt with through the site plan process?
Thank you, and through the chair. So initially, and Ms. Wise can clarify exactly, but through the site plan process, we would undertake necessary hydrogeological studies. We'd be looking at groundwater. Those geotechnical studies would also be undertaken and reviewed. And then construction access and how the site would actually be constructed is something we would address through the overall site concept and through the DA as well. So perhaps Ms. Wise can clarify if we've addressed that at this point in the rezoning.
Thank you, Mr. Feldberg. Sorry to jump in there. Yes, through you, Madam Chair. At the time of site plan approval, there will also be things like an oil grit separator. Our stormwater management staff have also identified clay liners to isolate the underground tanks for the future installation. They'd also be looking at a spill action plan for any type of spill that may occur on site. And then also the stormwater management report will be addressing the minor storm events to ensure that there's adequate treatment for hydrocarbon contamination through any of those storm events. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I would assume the monitoring of the well at that time would be done, or is there a plan for the well? Is this the conversation to have about the well here, or is it a site plan conversation?
Thank you, and through the chair. This would again be a site plan matter. We would address that through the Hydro-G. We'd establish a monitoring program, and then we'd ask the developer to implement as part of our site plan approval.
Okay. And then my last question again would be around the access of onto Oxford Street. I know through the urban peer review panel, they talked about the access not having just having a right-hand entrance into the property and or not having one into the property, only having one out of the property. Just it's kind of hard to see with the plans that we have in front, but I just want to make sure that that has been dealt with through this application.
Through you, Madam Chair, the initial site layout did have a rights in, rights out access from Oxford Street. Through some comments that we received from the urban design peer review panel in our transportation department, our note for the future site plan process is to consider only rights out. So the last version of the site plan does have a rights out only exit. And this was to avoid or minimize a sort of conflict in terms of vehicles entering the site, leaving the drive-through, leaving the site, and then also things like some of the garbage storage was also located in that area. So at this time, we do have a rights out only, and we're hoping to carry that forward through site plan.
Thank you.
Okay, any other technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is just with respect to the drive-through speaker there. I recognize there's a recommendation that we provide relief from the minimum distance to separate from the residential property adjacent as a result of the sound retaining wall. Do we do this with much frequency? I haven't seen us do this very often. Every once in a while it does come up, but I'm not sure as to the efficacy of the wall in terms of preventing sound disruption to adjacent properties.
Through you, Madam Chair, I might just let my colleagues speak to the sort of global application of the reductions. For this particular site, there was a noise study that accompanied the requested reduction. So typically our standard requirements for a 30-meter setback, that can be reduced to 15 meters if there is a 2.4 meter noise wall. In this case, the noise wall was recommended to be 3.2 meters, so slightly higher, and that allowed for the reduction down to 10.5 meters.
If I might just follow up through you, Madam Chair, in that have we, where we've allowed those reductions on the certain height of wall, that second reduction that's being proposed here is something that's not necessarily spelled out in any of our documents. That would just be on a case-by-case basis. Is that correct? So the one reduction to 15 meters is based, we actually have that in documentation, but in this case, we're going further than what's supported by our standards. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. So that is correct. That is a standard application, but it also can be reduced further based on a site-specific noise study, which was submitted in this case.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? Okay, I'll look for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Kabaga and seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call the vote. Get ready. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Kabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder? Is he still here?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. So I'll go to committee room 1, where we do have members of the public. I don't know if there are members of the public for this particular application. Oh, and I see somebody. Mr. Kirkness, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, and thank you for having this public meeting. This is quite a bottleneck in the planning process in these times, but we're glad to get here. We have been waiting for some time, of course, and we appreciate staff's report. We know this is a very noticeable, conspicuous site, kind of coming in from the west end of town, and we aim to do a really nice job on the site design. We have a chain restaurant with a very contemporary design. We have the gas bar and the C-store behind it. But on page 4 of the report, or at least the 4th page in, I know when I print these off the computer, there's no page numbers, but I think it's the 4th page in, has an illustrative kind of site plan that shows the landscaping across Oxford Street. And in fact, that's further into the site now, as the site plan is further on in the report that is more up to date. But the concept, at least, to show substantial landscaping and bringing a building out to the front as much as we can is an important thing, as well as along Westell Bourne, which the landscape strip there has been widened. What's out of date about that plan that's 4 pages in is the right turn into the site from Oxford Street, and that was addressed by Sonia and asked by Anna, Councillor Hopkins. So but basically that is the layout and that's intended. And we note that there were 16 letters sent to surrounding landowners, and there was just one reply received about making sure that the access on Oxford Street would be common someday. And so we suspect, by the lack of complaints at least, or concerns, that the area, the residential area, seems okay, certainly, with this proposal. I think the proposal will serve to make the corner certainly more functional, more aesthetic. The main entrance is certainly going to be off of Westell with its Westell Bourne with its full turns, and quite limited on Oxford Street with only a right turn out. So we're in agreement with the staff report as it is in front of you, and we're looking forward to site plan consultation and approval soon, because the tenants want to get onto this site. So we would ask that you adopt the report and recommend it to council. And thank you very much, and I'd be glad to try and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkness. So I'm just going to ask if there is anybody else in Committee Room 1 that would like to speak or ask questions about this application. I'm not seeing any, and I know we have staff in the, thank you, Michael. We have staff there that are there to assist any members of the public that are there, so I'm seeing that there are none. So I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Keabaga, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we're cooking with steam now. Are there any other comments, questions about this application? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask another question. I have one more of staff, and that is around the sanitary capacity. As we know, this is going to be a larger service station, more use, and we don't have municipal services out there yet. So I am wondering if when the municipal services will be coming into this area. Generally, there's a lot of development that's going on. I would anticipate sooner than later, but given that the capacity is going to increase on the sanitary sewers, if we have an idea when municipal services will be coming in to this area.
Thank you. Ms. Wise or Mr. Feldberg?
Thank you, and through the chair. So based on the comments that we received from wastewater, there are plans to make a connection from Link Way and then flow southerly to Oxford Street. In those comments, though, we don't have a specific date. I imagine that we would tie them to some of the future developments that are occurring in the area, future extensions, I'd say the Sifton lands, and we could also potentially be tying it in with some of the future construction of the Oxford Street widening, which currently is planned for 2026.
Thank you for that. With that, I'd be happy to move this recommendation. I think it will be an addition to this area that is vastly growing and populating. And I also want to just get back to my original comments about the importance of monitoring of tributary sea and the soil contamination in the wells and all those things that this area is very sensitive to, that will continue through the monitoring process and the site plan process. So with that, happy to move the recommendation.
Sorry, moved by Councillor Hopkins. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by the mayor. If there are no comments or questions, I'll call the, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I still have a bit of concern with the drive-through piece. Spent a lot of time putting the policies in place, had the latitude to be able to reduce it to 15 meters, and then going further than that causes me a little bit of concern. With environmental reports, we have the expertise in-house to review the submitted environmental impact studies. Do we have the expertise in-house to review a submitted sound study? Through you, Madam Chair.
To staff.
Madam Chair, Michael Tomazinski here. We typically rely on the professional engineer's recommendation provided in the report by the applicant. And just to answer the councillor's earlier question about how frequent these happen, if I were to put a percentage on it, I would say it's probably about half of new drive-through setback distances require some relief. And the regulations in the zoning bylaw provide that formula for when you can't meet the setback distance. It provides that recipe for when we would accept a shallower distance and accompanying, obviously, with the noise study to make sure that the wall is appropriately located and the height would mitigate the noise impact. And that has been received in this case.
Through you, Madam Chair, perhaps as a follow-up, where that relief has been granted, do we receive complaints from adjacent residential properties after construction?
Madam Chair, it's not something that I would have available at hand, that type of information, since they wouldn't, those types of complaints wouldn't reach my desk. So it's not something I can answer with any certainty. Now, if I could just add to that, though, it's rare, though, that we have to go back through zoning amendments or any minor variance process to increase the standards that were previously approved by council.
And as a final question, through you, Madam Chair, this is a neighborhood that has a fairly not very dense residential at this time. But as we continue to grow out that way, and this is an area that will be developed in the relatively near future, there's the potential to have more residential units and closer residential units. And so if where those circumstances ended up that the sound hadn't been mitigated substantially or appropriately, what recourse is there available to an adjacent homeowner?
Madam Chair, that is something I would have to follow up just with our bylaw enforcement colleagues, just to ensure that they have these the recourse to be able to deal with this. I know they deal with sound on patios and other such areas, but I'd have to reach out with them just to make sure that they would be capable of dealing with these types of noise matters that are associated with drive-through restaurants.
Okay. Thank you. So just as a final comment on this, I'm certainly not equipped to be able to dispute the study that's been submitted. I think where we do get engineering reports, often when we take a look at certain assessments, there are a second set of eyes that come from the city to determine whether it's appropriate or not. It's hard for us to have that expertise here, which is why we kind of have a pre-mandated amounts of setbacks, 30 if in normal circumstances, 15 if you create a 2.5 meter noise barrier, and then you get closer and closer in these circumstances. So and then once built, that's where it kind of becomes helpful to have a sense of whether these are effective standards, is having a sense of how much complaint comes in after the post building condition starts to be established for a while. I don't have enough to vote against this here. We don't have any complaints from the neighbors on file, but it's something that like ever since we established the drive-through policies a while back, we provide a fair amount of relief, as Mr. Tomczyk said, about half of them. And so I hope that the mitigative measures are effective. But once built, there's really not much recourse that you could go back to the property owner and say, well, you're going to have to move your drive-through. It's been approved, so you can't alter the post-construction condition because we gave the approval. The most that bylaw could do is say, turn your speaker down a little bit. That might be about the extent of it, especially if they're adhering to the conditions as we approve right here in this kind of a meeting. So so that's my tension with this a little bit. I just wanted to push on it a little bit and continue to watch for these as they come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? I'm not seeing any. It's been moved by Councillor Hopkins. Do I have a second? Oh, sorry, the mayor did second that. So I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins,
Yes.
Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga, Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Perfect. We'll move on to item 3.2, which is 584 and 588 Wonderland Road North, another public participation meeting. And first, I will ask for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
All right, so I will go to staff, and it's again Ms. Wise for a brief intro for this application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, file OZ 9114. This is to permit new office, medical dental office, and pharmacy uses together with at least one dwelling unit. The site is located at the corner of Wonderland Road North and Kingsway Avenue. It's currently comprised of 2 existing single detached dwellings. There are 2 options for the proposed built form, either through the conversion of the existing dwellings with an addition and a new second story, or it could be through a new purpose-built building that would require the demolition of the existing buildings. The access is proposed from Kingsway Avenue only. There are 2 existing accesses from Wonderland Road. These will be removed and restored to Boulevard. In this area, there are a number of existing small-scale office and mixed-use buildings that are well integrated into the surrounding area. Most of them are located along Wonderland Road North as well. This orientation to the arterial road also provides separation distance to the interior of these adjacent neighborhoods. The recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statements, is appropriate for the site, and is compatible with the surrounding area. The amendment will allow for the requested office, medical dental office, and pharmacy uses, together with one dwelling unit through a new specific policy to the 1989 official plan. It'll also allow for greater than 200 square meters commercial gross floor area at the intersection of Kingsway and Wonderland in the neighborhood's place type in the London plan. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wise. Any technical questions concerning this application? Seeing none, I'll go to committee rooms 1 and 2 to see if there is any member of the public that would like to speak to this. Go ahead, sir, if you would like to state your name and if you're comfortable stating your address. If not, you can give it to the clerk in the room. And go ahead.
Sure.
You have 5
My
minutes.
name is, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me here. I am Dr. Haider Al-Jalawi, and I am representing this application here. I'm a dental surgeon, and I work in London. And my practicing dental office is Wonderland of Commissioners, Dawn Dental Center. And the idea was to relocate my office to Wonderland and Kingsway. And then the plan had expanded a little bit by adding the medical and small pharmacy to the site itself. That's briefly what I'm planning to do. And I've been working and serving London City since years now, and we've been dealing with what's happening here the last 3-4 months. But we passed through dealing with emergencies and preventing people from going to hospitals and doing surgeries at our office. So yeah, I'm here today. Just it's actually the first time for me to attend a meeting, public meeting, and everything is new for me. So I apologize if I'm saying something not to be said here. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
No, you did fine. No mistakes. Don't worry about that. Thank you very much. So I'll go to the committee to see if there are any questions of a technical nature or any questions of the applicant. Oh, it doesn't look like they have any questions, so thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public in the committee room that would like to speak to this application?
I've canvassed and there are none in committee room 1 and 2.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I need a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, there's a staff recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Seconded by the mayor. And I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we'll move to item 3.3, a public participation meeting concerning 944 Hamilton Road. So I need a motion to open the PPM, and that's Councillor Turner moving that, and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I will call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Wu, who will give us a brief introduction on this application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a zoning bylaw amendment for the lands known municipally as 944 Hamilton Road, located at a gateway location in the city at the northeast corner of the intersection of Hamilton Road and Highbury Avenue North. The applicant is requesting a zoning bylaw amendment which would permit an expanded range of commercial uses on the subject site, including 2 new restaurant uses with a drive-through. The proposed development includes a new building fronting onto Hamilton Road and an existing building located at the rear of the subject site. Currently, there is an existing vacant 1-story building located at the rear of the site. Surrounding uses include low-density residential uses immediately to the north and northeast, and a financial institution immediately to the east. The amendment will require a change to the zoning bylaw from a convenience commercial service station zone to a residential R1-6 zone to an associated shopping area commercial special provision zone. Special provisions are required to permit a reduced number of parking spaces, a reduced lot frontage and lot depth, reduced landscape buffers, a reduced parking area setback, and to recognize a reduced rear yard setback for the existing building. The requested amendment to expand the range of permitted commercial uses on the subject site and to allow for 2 restaurants and a drive-through is considered appropriate, as the recommended associated shopping area 1, 2, and 3 zone is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. The recommended zone provides additional uses that are appropriate and compatible with the surrounding area and provides an increased opportunity to effectively develop the underutilized site. Development Services is recommending approval of all but 1 special provision, being the reduced parking area setback of 0 meters, whereas a minimum of 3 meters is required, on the basis that it would negatively impact the streetscape along Highbury Avenue North, and that it does not conform to the London Plan or the 1989 official plan. This will result in the loss of 1 additional parking space for the applicant, which has already been included in the parking reduction special provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. Any technical questions on this application? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the report, it states that this would be providing for an existing and a new building, both to be served by a drive-through. In the site concepts, it only appears that one is served by drive-through. So perhaps a little explanation of how that works.
Okay, clarification from Ms. Wu.
For you, Madam Chair, there will only be one drive-through provided on the site. That's for the proposed restaurant fronting onto Hamilton Road.
Any other technical question, or do you have follow-up to that, Councillor Turner?
I just, in 2.1, it just says the recommended amendment would allow for expanded range of commercial uses with 2 restaurants with a drive-through being proposed for the existing and proposed buildings. So it may require an amendment if that leads to some confusion there, but I appreciate the explanation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other technical questions? Seeing none, I'll go to committee room 1 and 2 to see if there is anybody that would like to speak to this. And we have the agent for the applicant, Mr. Kirkness. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Again, I'm representing York, Hamilton Road Commercial Inc. And we're at another conspicuous corner of the city here, not West Elmore and Oxford, but Hamilton and Highbury. And coming from the south, this is a pretty conspicuous site. And right now, it's kind of a derelict, vacant service station lot with the closed former Tim Hortons. So the 2 assembled site represent kind of a blight in the area. And York is intending to make pretty nice improvements. If you look at page 4 into the report, or the 4th page in, you'll see the illustrative concept where the restaurant is along the Hamilton Road frontage within a landscape setting. The existing building is there. There's substantial landscaping around that on the north side with mature trees that would be kept along with that existing parking area. So the aim, of course, is to improve the intersection quite a lot. So we basically, I should say that the planning report points out that 72 letters have been sent out to area residents and only 1 reply was received, and talked about issues that were kind of not on the site, such as the speed of traffic on Highbury Avenue. And so I'm taking by that the residents have no objection, or perhaps feel that this is going to be quite an improvement to the area that we can look forward to. Now, we appreciate the staff's supportive recommendation, and we hate to come here and quibble over 1 parking space, but we need to. And the reasons why we think we should leave that parking space is that, and maybe you should go to about the 12th page in where there is the site plan that illustrates what is happening and shows the road widening dedication. But the site, the actual parking space is right at the very north end of the site. As you go in the access from Highbury Avenue. So it's that first space in, if you were going in that access, would be on your left side. And that's the space that is within 3 meters, or at least 0 meters from the new widened street. Here are the reasons why we think it would be more fair to be able to have that space. Number 1 is that the space exists. We aren't proposing a new space there. It exists. The reason why it's not more than it is from the new widened road is because the city's requirement for road widening. The road widening, you can see angles. It's a dotted line on that site plan that's 12 pages in, I think it is. So it's based really on the city standard. That's not saying it's the city's fault, but that's the way the situation is. We don't have a tenant for that existing building yet, but the interest seems to be from dentists and doctors, and they're high parkers. And we have the restaurant as well. We just feel that we need every space we can get, and especially leave those that exist alone if they're not in the way of the road widening. Now, you can also see on that site plan, there are quite a lot of existing spaces right along Highbury Avenue that are being removed on account of the road widening. 13 spaces. So we appreciate that there is some deviation from the 55 spaces that we need down to the 46 or 47. But again, without the road widening, we would have had certainly more parking. We do know that that road widening cross section, that in other words, if you apply a cross section of kind of the standard components of improving that intersection, there would be a green boulevard along, it would be city property, but it would be a boulevard. It's not as though there would be pavement meeting pavement. There would still be room for green, for landscaped area, but it would be on the city's property. And that's part of the cross-section standards. The staff state that the parking area would be easier to maneuver without that space, but you know, this space is kind of on the going outside. It's hard to think that there's any real problem with the functioning of that parking area by leaving that space alone. And I guess lastly is that, again, we hate to come here in these times and quibble over one space, but we feel it would be more fair to have it, and it exists. And so we would ask for that consideration from you. If you agree with the applicant, with us, we would need to add a provision that does allow parking spaces to be within 0 meters of that right of way for that one existing space, if you want to be that specific. But we would ask for that consideration. Otherwise, we agree with the staff report. We thank the staff for their supportive recommendation. We hope you would adopt that component of the report along with our additional request and recommend it to council. Questions, I'd be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkness. Are there any questions for the applicant? I'm seeing none. Oh, the mayor has a question. Go ahead, Mayor Holder.
Perhaps maybe this now becomes a technical question to staff, but I'm sure that the property developer made the case with respect to the additional parking spaces. So I'm trying to understand from staff what the resistance was, if that's an appropriate question through you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll go to staff.
Madam Chair, Michael Tomazinski here. It becomes an issue of functioning. So you have a parking space that immediately abuts the property line. Typically, there's a 3-meter setback to allow for, say, cars are looking to exit the site and need to queue before they can get into traffic as traffic is backing up. Well, that car is now blocking parking spaces. And the other thing is those types of 3-meter setbacks also provide opportunities for snow storage, turning radius. So it really just becomes a functionality issue of this site.
Mr. Mayor?
So thank you for that. So I need to then perhaps ask our the consultant on behalf of the client, and that is that would the, I think your comments about staff's work is appreciated. Would this difference of the one space impact proceeding with the project?
Mr. Kirkness, did you hear the question? That was for you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Do you want to repeat it, Mr. Mayor?
Sure, Mr. Kirkness, I do not know if you heard the response of staff with respect to my question about the one space. And I commented how complimentary you have been to staff, how they've approached this. Hence my question, would not proceeding with this one space impact your client's desire to proceed with this project?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. No, this is not a showstopper or a deal breaker. We simply think that the site would function just as well. There's a long throat on that access for people to get in and out. The interference, as Mr. Tomazinski said, it's a functional thing, you know, with cars backing out or something in there. it's a long way from the actual turning points, and the throat of that access is longer than usual as well. In other words, the distance of the access. So we don't think that there's a functional problem. We just feel that because the space exists, it's the city's road widening requirement that makes us in fault of not being able to make the regulation of the 3 meters, that there's no real reason why that space shouldn't be able to remain. So we're asking for your consideration just because we think it's more fair to leave it, and it's not going to disrupt the function of the parking area to any real extent. So thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkness. Do you have any follow-ups, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from committee? We can close, if there are no other members of the public in committee room 1 and 2, and I think we already heard from Mr. Schulteis that there aren't, so we can close the PPM. I need a motion. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer. Where'd he go?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was still on microphone. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we've had a lot of questions, but I wonder if there are any more or any comments during this session. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of the application as and the recommendation as recommended by staff, and including the removal of that one parking spot. It'll be good to see that corner redeveloped. I think this is important. I think the adjacencies are such that that there won't be much conflict associated with any of the relief that's been recommended or granted in the recommendation here. I do want to push back a little bit at the mayor's question on whether this would such a circumstance would prevent the project from proceeding, because I challenge with that is that we have a pretty robust set of guidelines and rules that, especially in the zero setback circumstance, that tries really hard to contemplate how to provide the best accommodation to businesses and developments so that they can proceed. And those are telegraphed out pretty clearly to applicants at the outset, and especially in the pre-consultation meeting where they talk with staff to figure out what they might be up against in terms of the framework for development and what relief might be able to be provided or how they might be able to work around it. To ask whether it's a showstopper or whether development can or cannot proceed in the applicant's standpoint, they would have known this well in advance and would choose to proceed or not based on that, or roll the dice when they come to committee. But my challenge with it is that that the questions come up a few times, and it seems to imply that we're going to be willing to bend the rules further just because they can proceed or it can't. And that doesn't create a level playing field or an impression of fairness to other applicants. So I just wanted to push back on that a little bit because it frustrates me when I hear this. But otherwise, I'm supportive of the recommendation and I'm prepared to move.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, thanks very much. I'm sure I've frustrated Councillor Turner more than once because I've brought this issue up more than once to more than one client. And I don't think it's an unreasonable question. And I appreciated the answer of the consultant on behalf of the client. So I know he would never want to preclude any member of committee from asking any question, as is their right. But I'll probably ask the question again, Chair, just so you know, and probably frustrate the councillor again. But I think, again, to give a sense, since this is a public meeting, to get a feel, not only on my behalf, but on behalf of the public, how the client feels about it. I think that's useful. And the fact that they go through a pre-consultation, I think is great as well. So I appreciate the councillor's concern, and certainly on my behalf to give me wisdom, and on we go from there. But I suspect it will not be the last time I ask it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hopkins. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there's a seconder for this motion, but I would be happy to support second the recommendation. Having 72 letters, notices go out to a community and only get one response really says something about maybe this is something that the community wants to see happen. Mr. Kirkness's explanation about beautifying and bringing some life back into this intersection, I want to thank the applicant for that as well. It's really important, and I appreciate staff's comments about functionality when we're talking about reducing that one spot, parking spot. I think that is really important when we hear concerns about functionality moving in and out of commercial spots, properties, and getting back into traffic is something that is, to me, important that we take a really good look at, and happy to second the recommendation.
Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Any other questions or comments? I have a question for staff. So when I look at the real-time view of this area, I see that there's a paved boulevard. I wonder to staff if that, I don't believe it's a boulevard bike path, but I just wonder if I could get confirmation on that.
Through the chair, I don't believe there is a bike path there.
Thank you. So that would have concerned me even more if we had gone ahead to allow that additional parking space. When you know, we don't know what the future holds for the road widening, the immediate future, and all of that. And I think it's important to know that there's pedestrians, there's probably cyclists using this area, and then there's the traffic in the area, which is, I believe, can be quite heavy. So I'm not opposed at all to staff's recommendation, and I think I will support it going forward. Are there any other questions or comments on this application? Seeing Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer, go ahead.
Thank you. So I think I'm persuaded by the arguments about allowing some special provisions to kind of squeeze this into the plot that's there. I am a little concerned by the suggestion from the applicant's consultant, Mr. Kirkness, that of all the ranges of uses that are allowed under ASA 1 and 2 and 3, you know, it's the heavier parking requirement one that seems to be a focal point for the non-restaurant with drive-through building. And I do think that runs the risk of being a bit of a problem at a particularly congested intersection. This is not a very easy spot to get into. If anyone's tried to get into that Tim Hortons when it was a Tim Hortons, you know, there's only limited ways to get in and out of there. And I think the applicant has, in trying to get a drive-through onto this property, really pushed the envelope in terms of what can be squeezed into this area, and then to also put on a higher parking requirement use, sort of like the highest parking you could imagine for ASA 3 is probably the medical dental office kind of use. I'm a little concerned about that. So I certainly don't want to grant the extra parking space. I want to be clear about that, because I think that's just making the potential problem even worse, is to say we're going to try and get as many turning movements and parking movements on this site as possible at a corner that is pretty busy with vehicle traffic. And I think making it Like I think the allowances that have already been made are pretty significant, and I think they're reasonable given the circumstances. But I think it's hard to say. On the one hand, we can put a drive-through in here because we can get away with less parking, but also we need more parking. I think that's a hard argument to sustain. So I support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. And it's been moved and seconded. And I'm not seeing any more hands raised. So I'll call the vote. Starting with Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
All right, move along to item 3.4, which is another public participation meeting for 754 to 760 Baseline Road. I'll look for a mover to open the PPM. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And that motion oh, sorry.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. On the other board that I sit on, I have to announce whether the motion is carried or not. So I will go to staff for an introduction of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Catherine Lowry. This is an application for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the lands located at 754 to 760 Baseline Road East, located at the corner of Baseline Road East and Fairview Avenue. The application proposes to redevelop the site, which is currently undeveloped, with a new 4-story, 28-unit apartment building. The site is surrounded by predominantly low-density residential uses, as well as office uses, and Victoria Hospital across Baseline Road. The building is proposed to be sited at the corner of Baseline and Fairview, with parking provided both in the rear yard as well as partially under the building cantilever at the rear of the building. And outdoor amenity space is also proposed in the rear yard. To facilitate the proposed development, the applicant has requested to add a specific area policy to the 1989 official plan, to amend the existing specific policy for the institutional place type in the London plan, and to rezone the site from its current office OF2 zone to add a residential R84 zone with a bonus zone. In exchange for an increase in height and density, the applicant has proposed exceptional building design, as well as a 1-bedroom affordable housing unit. A number of special provisions are also proposed to be implemented through the bonus zone, which include the increased maximum density of 165 units per hectare, an increased maximum building height of 17 meters, to recognize Baseline Road East as the lot frontage, as well as a reduced parking rate of 0.9 spaces per unit. Reductions in front yard, exterior side yard, and interior side yard setbacks are also requested. Staff is satisfied that the recommended amendments are consistent with the PPS and are in conformity with the enforced policies of the 1989 official plan and the London plan. And for those reasons, staff recommend that the amendments be approved. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So committee, I'm going to go to the committee room first. We have 3 speakers waiting to be heard in that committee room. So I have a list here. I'll start with the applicant or the agent for the applicant, Mr. McCauley from Zelenka Preamo. If you would like to go ahead, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would just like to first note we are agreeable with staff's recommendation. Thank you to staff for moving this along. As you'll hear briefly shortly, there will be a number of comments here from the public. I would just like to note as well, we're happy to exchange my information, the applicant's information, with the community members and the public to voice and hear their concerns through our subsequent site plan approval application and work with them as we move forward and make sure that we can address their concerns as appropriately as we can. And that's all the comments I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. I'll go next to Mr. Robinson. Go ahead, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, my name is Ross Robinson, and I live right next door to the proposed building. I have no concern really that the building is going to be built there. I realize we do need affordable housing in the city, but I'm just asking that the building be reduced in size from 28 units down a bit. There's just not enough room to park 26 cars. And I mean, you're asking for a zoning of the front yard depth of 1.1 meter. I mean, this is going to be right up against the sidewalks. And all these mature trees, at least 7, 8 mature trees that are at least, I don't know, I know I've been there 22 years. They've been there and just as big. So I don't know, I'd like to just get these fences also a little higher. They're proposing the fences at 1.8 meters. Well, they're about 20 inches lower than my property, and I've got a 5-foot fence now that I can see over. That's not going to make it. Like, I'm going to be able to see all these cars parked. And their garbage, by the way, is right underneath my kitchen window. So I'm going to get the odor. I'm going to get the skunks. I'm going to get the raccoons. I'm going to get all that. Anyway, that's basically my complaint about the building. If they wanted to make a bigger building, they should just buy my property and then they'd have a big square there. They could do what they want. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Next, I will go to Mr. May, who is speaking on behalf of his mother, I believe.
It will be Ms. May speaking.
Perfect. Come to the microphone, Ms. May, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee.
I could try this. Thank you. I have a number of concerns, just like Mr. Robinson. His was the privacy, and that was my last question, but I might just want to move it to the front. What are you doing about privacy to the existing neighbors? We are mostly single family, we don't have 5 or 6 different families in each building. We just have one. And we all like our outdoors. We like to be in the backyard. And now we're going to have this building looking over our yards. Where's our privacy? I'm with him. It should be a better fence. When they built the 4-story building behind us, which seemed to conform to the height that is the 13 meters, not the 17 they want. They built a 6-foot fence for us for privacy. And I think that's what you should have right now too. Now we get back to, we've done the height bit. They want 17 meters. I read that the existing is 13. Why do they need the extra? And in they want to change the front yard and the side yard and the rears. Right now, the front yard is supposed to be 8 meters, which is reasonable. It gives you room for grass. It doesn't mean when you're walking along, you can reach out and touch the building. Right now, it isn't even social distancing from the sidewalk. The rear is only 6 meters. Side yard is supposed to be 8 meters also. That gives room for a lawn. Instead of looking at the building as you walk by it, you'll still look at the building, but you'll at least see grass. The parking has been changed from 29 spaces to a parking rate of 0.9 spaces per unit. Now it's supposed to be at least 125. What are they going to do? Jam them in there with a can opener? There'd be no room to open your door hardly. I think that it should just stay the way it is. And getting down to the last question I had, this density of 165 units per hectare. They're only asking for 29 units. Why do they wish to tack this on? Is it so that if they buy up people's property like yours and down the, what is a hectare anyways? Is that at least a city block? Anyways, it would certainly pay them to buy up everybody from all down Fairview to Roundtree to put in this 165 units. Right now, we're beginning to feel like we live in a canyon. That would be another bowl to the canyon. I don't see why they need it if they don't need it for 28 units. So that takes care of all the questions I have.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Ms. May. So I'll go to committee next to see if you have technical questions before we close the PPM. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I think there's a couple of things that might be able to be explained to for the questions that came up there, and perhaps through you. The first question is the front lot setback. What would be the actual distance from the sidewalk edge to the building facade? Recognizing that it wouldn't be directly adjacent to the sidewalk.
Ms. Lowry?
Through you, Madam Chair, and looking at the site concept plan submitted with the application, the existing property line pre-widening is just set in from the existing sidewalk, and the setback from the existing property line is 3 meters to the proposed building. Now, the recommended 0.1 meter setback from baseline, being the front lot line as proposed, would be from the ultimate road allowance post widening.
Councillor Turner?
Sorry, thank you, Ms. Lowry. I'm not sure if you cut out at the end there, but the distance from the sidewalk then to the building facade would be roughly, it wouldn't be 0.1 meters, it would be, there would be more space. What would roughly that space be? Just that's a concern that we heard from the two presenters there.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The existing sidewalk is approximately 3 meters from the proposed building.
Great, thank you. So it's still about 9 feet, 9 to 10 feet from the sidewalk. So there's some space. It's not directly adjacent there. Second question, I imagine this is something that we might consider for recommendations for the site plan part. The concern about the placement of the garbage pad there, which is directly adjacent to the neighboring property. We've seen this in a couple other applications before, where they look for the garbage collection site to be far away from the building, but close to the adjacent residential building. Is there opportunity, or had there been discussion about a better placement for that?
Ms. Lowry?
Through you, Madam Chair, the area on site that's proposed for the garbage is not actually intended to be long-term garbage storage. For developments like this, garbage is required to be stored interior to the building. What that pad is merely just a place where the bins can be rolled out to on pickup day for the collection. After that, the bins are to be rolled back inside the building.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. I guess more of the point is that 1 day a week, there will be the potential for odors to the adjacent property. So to mitigate that to the greatest extent possible, not having it that close to the adjacent property would be preferable. Was that something that was discussed with the applicant, and is there a possible alternate location that might better suit that need?
Through you, Madam Chair, was absolutely something that was discussed at length through the process. The challenge with this site is the ability for a garbage collection vehicle to come in and maneuver without backing up great length. The other challenge is moving it closer to the building. There is that building cantilever with the parking situated underneath. So through our discussions with the applicant, this seemed to be the most feasible location for the collection pad.
Okay, thank you. I'll address that further in the comments and our recommendations. And I think the last part of site plan was a kind of lost that, but I think there's still a couple of recommendations that we can make into the site plan process. So thank you.
Any other technical questions? See, oh, Councillor Hopkins and then Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. I heard concerns around the loss of trees and the privacy part, and also the applicant referring to further communications. Is, first of all, what is the plan for the privacy, and is there something that can continue that conversation? I want a better idea of understanding the fencing and what they're doing to mitigate the privacy for the residents in the area. And my second question is, I'm not sure where this goes. Was there a shadow survey done on this property as well? Because I understand there are some concerns about the use of the solar panels that are near this property.
I'll go to Ms. Lowry first.
So in terms of the shadow study, one was conducted as part of the urban design brief that was required as part of the complete application. The findings of that study was that there wouldn't be any negative impacts as a result of the proposed development. In terms of landscaping and fencing, those are matters that are typically addressed at the site plan stage, a future site plan stage. As for the fencing, looking at their site concept plan, the fencing proposed is currently a 1.8 meter high wood fence, which equates to 6 feet.
Any other? Oh, great. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I'm wondering if, through the chair, you could help me understand how the building face is going to align with the existing streetscape. So you've got buildings at 746 and 750, which are already set back from, and frankly, the road has already been widened on those properties. And then you've got the residential properties that are further to the east on the other side of the road. So how will this building, if it's constructed as designed in the site concept, how will it match up in terms of the overall sort of streetscape and the front faces of those buildings?
Ms. Lowry.
Madam Chair, Michael Tomazinski here, and perhaps I could just jump in first. I'm looking at page 208 of the agenda, and I'll just give you a moment if you're able to scroll there. And what we're seeing is the location of the proposed building, and as Ms. Lowry mentioned, it's 3 meters setback from the sidewalk. But more to the point, just to the left of that image, you can see the neighboring property line and just the eastern portion of the adjacent building. So this building will be set slightly in front of the existing building to the west. And if I'm just eyeballing it, it's probably about 4 meters ahead in front of the existing building.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so this is not a insurmountable obstacle, but for me, what I'm getting from this concept plan is that I think the density is okay, but the location of the building it seems a bit squeezed. And I think the gentleman who spoke, I think he was trying to sell his property to the developer because it would make a square. And I actually think the square would be a lot easier to work with in terms of getting the building of this kind of intensity onto the property in a way that fit in with the surrounding buildings and provided for not just like a close connection into the sidewalk, but reasonable landscaping out in front of the building. I'm trying to imagine what it's going to look like once the road is widened, and I think that's the future state we have to be thinking about. what kind of room there will be for, vegetation, boulevard trees, things like that. So I think it can work the way that it is designed, but I think it would work better if there was more room at the back of the lot to the north. Frankly, if the property that the member of the public had mentioned, that can't really be the decision for the zoning. I think the intensity is good. I think the 28 units, and it is 28 units. I want to emphasize that. I know that came up. I think it is confusing when we talk about units per hectare. Until I was on planning committee, it had been a long time since I talked about hectares at all. And that's not really something that's familiar to folks in their normal life. So, I think the 28 unit building is pushed to the front because there's not a lot of room at the back for parking and access. And that's because of the odd shape of the lot. So, I think an ideal situation would be if there was a big square lot and the same kind of building was on there and it was a little further back from the future road widening. I can support it the way that it is, but I do want to mention that I think that would be better overall. I think it would fit better into the existing streetscape with those buildings that are already there. I know that the one has one that kind of protrudes out, which is sort of what I was asking about. We can just see the corner of the one building at 750, but the other building that's further down, for example, has a entryway that kind of comes a bit further out even than that. And the residential to the east, I'm not sure, how that might transition to something else too, but making sure we have a kind of continuous streetscape that works well from an urban design perspective, I think is important when we're dealing with this particular building on the corner. So I appreciate the members of the public coming out and sharing their thoughts. I do think it would be a bit better if it was further back, but that's a bit of a site plan issue. And I don't think the way the site is set up, I don't think there's really a lot of options unless that other property were actually included in the development proposal.
So if there are no other technical questions, I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by the mayor. I'll call the vote. Gotta find my Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes, apologies, I forgot we were on technical.
That's okay. That's okay, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead. You said yes. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Holder.
One of them, yes.
That's what my kids go through every time I call them. And I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Is there any further discussion on this application? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm prepared to move the recommendation, and I'd also like to add two considerations for site plan. One being an alternate location for the garbage pickup point, not being adjacent to the residential property, and the second that privacy fencing be provided at a greater height. I think is the maximum 8 feet, like 2.4 meters, or whatever that might be. And perhaps just to clarify, so I get it right, through you to staff to figure out what the appropriate fencing level might be.
Are we asking staff right now, or do you just want to put in the maximum allowable height for a privacy fence?
I think it might be fair to ask staff for their comment on that,
okay,
as well as what the maximum is.
Okay.
Just to provide that separation between the residential use and the building.
So, Ms. Lowry, can you let us know what the maximum allowable height is for a privacy fence?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're just checking, but I believe, I think we're going to have to get back to you on this one. Apologies for that.
And perhaps just to clarify the question there, the specific question is there any objection to going towards that limit to provide privacy for 347 Fairview?
So thank you, and through the chair, just got confirmation that the max height is 2.1 meters or 7 feet, so we could go up to that height for this application.
And is there any objection from staff on putting that through as something for a site plan to consider?
Madam Chair, there's no objection to that.
Councillor Turner, go on. Do you have any other additions?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Those would be the two considerations I'd like to put forward to site plan, and happy to move to the rest of the recommendation.
Perfect. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hopkins. Were there any other comments? Okay, so I too just want to say thank you to Mr. Robinson and Ms. May for coming out. I know we sometimes move quickly through these things and there's a lot of technical jargon. I just want to make sure that you got the information through the questions that were asked by committee. So the fence that's proposed by the applicant is 6 feet. Councillor Turner has put an addition in here that staff will consider going to the maximum height, which would be around 7 feet. So that will be something that will be worked at in the site plan portion of this application. That staff will work with the applicant and consider a 7-foot fence. And Deputy Mayor Helmer rightfully pointed out that there will be, this building will hold 28 units. That 165 units per hectare is a calculation that is used. So they take the size of a property and they use different calculations to determine the maximum number of units that can be built on a particular site. So the number of units in this building will be 28 units. The distance from the sidewalk to the new building will be 3 meters, so it will not be right up against the sidewalk. And the planner, Ms. Catherine Lowry, has pointed out that the garbage storage at this property will be stored inside and only come outside, rolled out in bins and placed on the pad for garbage collection days. So on the days that the garbage will be collected. Councillor Turner has also added that as something for staff to consider at the site plan phase, is to find an alternate location for that garbage pickup if possible. So that is what's on the table right now. Has been moved to go forward with this application, to approve it with those modifications that Councillor Turner has put forward. And it's been moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Are there any other comments or questions? I see none, so I will call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga. I heard yes.
I said yes.
Yes, I heard it. It was just very faint. Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
There is one last public participation meeting, and that is for 1992 Fanshawe Park Road West. Can I have a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Mayor Holder, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So that is open. I will go to staff for an introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a zoning bylaw amendment for the extension of the temporary zone at 1992 Fanshawe Park Road West. So the subject property is located to the west of the intersection of Fanshawe and Hyde Park, on the south side of Fanshawe Park Road, outside of the city's urban growth boundary, and immediately adjacent to the city's western boundary. So the applicant is proposing to extend the existing temporary zone to continue to permit the golf driving range and accessory uses for an additional 3 years. So the recommended extension to the temporary zone is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the enforced policies of the London Plan and the 1989 official plan, including those temporary use policies. So the existing driving range is compatible with surrounding uses and does not prevent the lands from being reverted to agricultural uses. There's also no buildings or development proposed on the lands. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Vivian. And I'm just going to make committee aware that the applicant is in the committee room. However, they don't have committee room number 5. They don't have planned remarks to make, but they are available for questions. Councillor Turner, go ahead.
Madam Chair, perhaps through you to Ms. Vivian, identified that the provincial policy statement, it was consistent with the PPS. The PPS, as you noted in 3.4 there, the intent of the agricultural policies in 2.3 of the PPS is to ensure agricultural remains the predominant use in prime agricultural areas. Permitted uses and activities within the prime agricultural area include agricultural uses, agriculture-related uses, and on-farm diversified uses. Do you see this as consistent with that part of the policy?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here. It's much like the official plan policies that would require this much the same. The agricultural areas predominantly used for agricultural uses. However, there's that caveat where temporary zoning could be applied to permit a use that would otherwise not be permitted by policy. And that's also an official plan policy. The PPS, the provincial policy statement, doesn't get that specific, but that's where the official plan policy would allow for exceptions through a temporary zone that would not otherwise be permitted through a long-term zone.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'll get into the debate part of it a bit later, but would you consider 23 years to be temporary?
It's a fair question, and it becomes a judgment call after that, whether or not the use should be extended further. Right now, it's really the only way that this site could function. And should council wish, it's the only way that this use could continue is through a temporary zone. We couldn't support a zoning bylaw amendment to permit this on a permanent basis, and so that's where the judgment call has to be made, whether or not this use that has achieved a measure of compatibility within the neighborhood, should it cease to operate from here on in, or the fact that it has achieved some compatibility should be extended for another few years.
Councillor Turner?
That's all I have for now, and then I'll get into debate afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do apologize. I just want confirmation on how many years that we've had this temporary agreement. Is it 23 years, or just wonder if I can confirm?
Okay, either Mr. Tomazinski or Ms. Lowry, or sorry, Ms. Vivian.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that is correct. I'd have to go back and do some research to get you the exact number of years. In my records that I could see, it was beginning back in 2003. However, I'd have to confirm how many years exactly.
Madam Chair, Michael Tomazinski here. The reason I was silent for so long is because I was just scrolling through the report. On page 252, 3.1 planning history, it was approved initially in 1991, and this is by the township. This is a driving range that the city actually inherited prior to annexation.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other technical questions? Okay, seeing none, I will look for a motion. I'll make sure there's no member of the committee or no member of the public. I know the applicant is there. Welcome to speak if the applicant would like to, but just double checking to make sure there are no members of the public in the committee room. And it's been confirmed there are none. So I'll look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This came up 3 years ago, and I argued against extending it for this reason, as I raised in the questions. The City of London started providing the approvals in 1997. And I see further that Township of London established it in 1991. So it's been in place for 29 years. The purpose and intent of the agricultural policies is to preserve agricultural land so that they can be productive for agricultural uses. In other words, grow crops. And for 30 years, this has been removed from production. And so the purpose and the reason for temporary zoning is to allow them to contemplate alternate uses back towards what's supposed to happen there, which is agriculture, or purposes that are associated with agriculture. But it hasn't been for 29 years. And as we continue to see urban growth boundary expansions, the prospect that this ever gets returned to agricultural production, if we just continue to provide temporary extensions 3 years at a time, gets closer to zero. And I have a lot of concerns with that. One of two things happens. Either we create the zoning to make this occur, but as Mr. Tomczynski said, it would not be permitted under the PPS. So if it's not permitted under the PPS, why do we allow perpetual zoning temporary extensions 3 years at a time for 29 years? It makes no sense to me. I recognize that it's an established commercial enterprise, that's a recreational enterprise that's been going on for some time, and that it has an established place within the community and its current position. But it is, in my opinion, completely contrary to the PPS for us to continue to repeat extensions over and over again. I think this is even more clear cut than when we take a look at temporary parking extensions. There's a very explicit section in the PPS which prohibits this from happening, but we're allowed to kind of skirt around it through a bit of a loophole with temporary extensions. So that's about all I'm going to say about it. I will vote against it again at this pass, and continue to do so if it continues to occur.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? Not seeing anyone putting their hands up. I have Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to sneak in at the end there, Chair. I'm going to support the recommendation of staff with respect to this. You know, maybe at some point a decision has to be made as opposed to this constant coming back every 3 years, one way or another. So I absolutely respect what Councillor Turner is talking about when he talks about the back and forth. It seems silly, but that's not in front of us today. And I think I think of an issue that we dealt with not that long ago that had to do with a small parcel of land that was at that, excuse me, please. Excuse me, that was considered for going from commercial to commercial use. This is a very small piece of land that by any standard on its own would not be deemed to be an agricultural piece, but that's not what's an argument today. You've got a viable business and the operator is willing to carry this on. While I absolutely empathize with Councillor Turner's position on it about making a decision, I will support the recommendation based on past use.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm sitting on the fence on this one. I recall 3 years ago sitting on the fence and voted to support the extension. And now 3 years later, almost 30 years into a temporary application, agricultural land, which is something that is something that should be open to agricultural land. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this one. I do have a question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. When does the extension end with this agreement? Sort of the timelines. I was trying to look for it and I couldn't find it.
Ms. Vivian.
Through you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to see if I could find the exact date, but I do believe it was March of this year was when the extension expired.
So right now it has expired.
So they submitted, sorry, through you, Madam Chair. So they submitted their rezoning application for the temporary extension back in February. And then in March, the extension had presumably expired. However, they did have an active Planning Act application going to continue that extension.
So they are continuing business at this moment?
Madam Chair, if I could just chime in. I'm on page 255 of the agenda, and that has the bylaw. And the last whereas clause indicates that on May 16th, 2017, they received a three-year extension. So this expired as of May 16th. As Ms. Vivian indicated, this application was received earlier this year, though, and since there was no planning committee available for us, we couldn't get back to committee to extend it prior to expiration.
Okay, thank you for that. And
We
I
didn't
would
have a
assume
PPM.
they've continued business then. I know we're just into June right now, and given the situation, I can understand that. So I would assume they're continuing business and for this year. And then I think for now, I'm going to listen to other comments from the committee, but I think at the very least, if we were going to support this, we could, and maybe not go 3 years, look at another extension, or I put it at least a year, given I might be open to something like that, but I'm willing to listen to the debate.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to come back into this, but you know, I'm listening to the level of discussion. I'm not seeing a rush to grow strawberries or other crops there at this point. It's a small piece of land. You've got a legitimate business owner that's paying taxes on the property and doing all that needs to be done. I don't know why the intent of committee wouldn't be to let this business person for this small piece of land carry on, notwithstanding the zoning. I respect it, I understand it, and I respectfully suggest that anything less than the amount of time required, I think would be again up to the business person, but would be a very difficult decision. They've got to make long-term decisions in business. It's how you do it. And we've been through a pretty tough economic time. I think rushing this back into agriculture today isn't going to help this business and the customers that clearly get a sense of enjoyment out of this. So I will once again recommend that we support the full request as suggested by staff.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just one quick point to that. The driving range component of this is carved out of, and it appears it's an agricultural operation all around it. The driving range was carved out of it. It looks for some supplemental income on top of the agricultural lands, but all the uses adjacent to it are all agricultural. So it's the ability to return it to agricultural use, I would imagine, would not be a significant change, and would be rather readily remediated. So I don't see the argument to continue with its continuing to extend temporary uses.
So I just want to caution that we're not going to keep going back and forth with cross debate. So I'll go to you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I wouldn't, except that for all my good logic seems to be challenged by colleagues. So there you go. And only to this extent, and I think that the learned counselor made the point that presumably to get some extra income. And you know what? We seem to sometimes miss that point. People have to survive even if they've agriculturally based. I would never suggest it wouldn't be easy to move it back into agriculture if that were to be the case. I do not know what the cost impact of that would be But clearly they've come to us because this makes economic sense, which is why I'm prepared to support it when asked college to consider it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So reminding that everybody that we're dealing with zoning matter and a land use planning matter and not necessarily a business matter, although those things do come into play when we are making our decisions. I do have a question for staff, if the committee will indulge me. So we inherited this as part of an annexation. It had been running since 91 as a driving range with the township. We inherited it in 1997, but I did hear that we, and I just want to make sure this is correct. I've written down the date 2003. Is that when we first started issuing temporary exemptions on this land? Can I get clarity on that?
Madam Chair, Michael Tomazinski here. This had always been approved through temporary zones. It's just that, sorry, I'm just looking at my date here. The first time the City of London Council approved the zoning was through the Z1 bylaw was in 2003. So before that, it had been approved by previous council, and there may have been periods where extensions weren't applied for or granted, but I would have to just check the timelines on that.
So for clarity, again, it was always an exemption to the PPS and the official plan, but we just did things differently as far as granting extensions to that exemption?
Madam Chair, the bylaws had been adopted for 3-year periods on a temporary basis. The maximum that the Planning Act allows is 3 years. And every 3 years, the applicants had come in and asked and were granted an additional 3-year extension.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? So I wonder if I could pass the chair to the vice chair, so I could just make a couple of comments.
Councilor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I did support this the last time it came to the Planning Committee for the 3-year exemption. I remember we had this same conversation. And I've had actually a spotted past with the PPS and the agricultural land issue. I believe I've evolved my my approach to this as I've learned more, and as I've learned more through sitting on the Planning Committee and through working with staff on various issues that have come forward. I think I will continue to support this temporary exemption, as much as I have always opposed the idea of these rolling 3-year exemptions that seem to go on in perpetuity. I do believe that this one is different than a parking lot, simply because, first of all, we did inherit this situation. Secondly, I do believe that this is, in my opinion, a low impact exemption. For the most part, this is natural land where people are hitting golf balls. So there is not a lot of infrastructure. There's not a lot of actual hard development that's taking place on this land. So I do believe it would be fairly easy to revert back to an agricultural use. And I don't feel personally like we are taking the viability of this land as for agricultural purposes offline and out of the realm of possibility. I will see how what motion comes forward with respect to this. I know in the past what we have done with 3-year exemptions for parking lots is sort of given notice to landowners. Okay, we're going to let this exemption go through this time around, but you're on notice that this idea of perpetual 3-year exemptions is not going to continue. So that's what we have done in the past with parking lots, and we sort of had a feeling that we should be fair to property owners to give them, again, that notice and a chance to adjust. But those are my comments. I have supported this exemption in the past. I'm inclined to do it again today, but again, I will listen to committee. And I am willing to take the chair back, Vice Chair, if you're willing to hand it over.
You can wrest the power from me, I suppose. It's all yours, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for your comments. And I think the more I listen, the more concerned I am about the 3-year extension. But I also hear the mayor's comments about a viable business, opportunities for that business to continue. I would be okay with extending the maybe 1-year extension, given that the business has already taken place. Our season is short, it's coming to an end, starting fresh next year. Having opportunities for agricultural uses this is a prime area for that. So I would like to bring forward that motion, extending it for 1 year. And I guess I'm looking for a seconder.
I am too. I'm not seeing a seconder, Councillor. Is there another motion? Deputy Mayor.
I'll put the staff recommendation on the floor and see if there's a seconder.
Seconded by the mayor. So we have a motion. Go ahead, Councillor.
I just want to make a couple of comments about the issue, and apologies for waiting. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a pecuniary interest on this issue. As I have mentioned many times before in meetings, my dad is employed at the National Golf Course Owners Association, and I wanted to make sure that this particular facility is not a member of the association. So having confirmed that they're not, I did want to weigh in. The block from the sort of rotary link, like the trail that's just west of Hyde Park Road, to the boundary of the city is basically intact agricultural land. So I'm looking at the big concession between sort of Fanshawe Park Road, Gainsborough to the south, everything west of that link. That's pretty well intact. And that is because we've maintained the zoning as agricultural through a very long period of time here at the City of London. And, you know, a lot of the intensification and building that is a one-way ticket away from agriculture has really been from the western, sort of the eastern boundary of that rotary link, and then east from there. So, you know, I'm not too concerned about a temporary zoning for a driving range, because yes, it's not being used as agricultural land, but it's also not got a building on it, and it hasn't been turned into a parking lot, and the soil is not disturbed the way that, you know, other kinds of developments could be done that would really seriously impact its viability for agricultural. We inherit some of these situations where you've got a use on the property. I do not think that there is much gained by discontinuing this particular temporary use. I am very eager to discontinue temporary use for parking lots where there are many different uses that could be accomplished there. I think this particular parcel is actually pretty large. Like, I mean, it's 8 hectares. It's not small, but I think it's perfectly fine the way it is. You know, it's really not impacting a whole lot. It's not a one-way ticket away from agriculture. Overall, all the land uses in this area are pretty stable and have been for quite some time. And I think that's the important objective is keeping some stability there and keeping the growth and the development of buildings away from this area. So, you know, a driving range does that just as well as agricultural land does. I don't think it's sort of pulling in development pressure. I think that's what's the bigger problem in this area and will be in the future is development pressure to build buildings on top of this land and other land around it. And so I think that's where my focus will be. I'm not interested in shortening the term. You know, I think that's a useful strategy for a parking lot where we want to have a building be built on the parking lot, but we don't want a building to be built here. We don't want a higher and better use to be done here other than agriculture, right? So it's really a choice between agricultural and driving range, and I would just leave it. I would leave it alone for now and just renew the temporary use. You know, the golf courses and areas that are used for that kind of activity are zoned open space. And there's really very little difference between the open space zoning and a temporary zone on the agricultural land, other than it's not being actively used for agriculture. And I think a long time ago, this particular plot was taken out of agricultural use. This is the least harmful use I can imagine for it. It's really not very invasive. It's not very disruptive. And I just think it's not a priority to discontinue this kind of use. So I'm going to go along with the 3-year extension. I think it's supported by the planning policy. I do think it is one of these sort of semi-permanent extensions, and we've been dealing with them. And I think Councillor Turner is right to be raising it, because the long-term use of the land, we always have to be vigilant about that. You know, and are we allowing things to occur that are going to impair the longer-term vision for the land? And I think this particular parcel, because of its history, I'm okay with the temporary renewal.
Okay, any other comments? We have a motion that's been moved and seconded, and I'll call the vote. If I can find my list. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
No.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Councillor Kayabaga.
No.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion loses on a tie of 3-3.
So we can Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
I suggest we leave it as it is with no recommendation, and we'll deal with it at the council.
Perfect. Okay, it will go to the council meeting with just that, with this planning report and no recommendation from committee. With that, there are no items for direction. There are no deferred matters or additional business that I'm aware of, and I'm not seeing anybody putting their hands up. So I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. You can just, we can do a show of hands. All those in favor? And it looks like a unanimous vote. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to the public for coming out. Our first PPM, I think it went very well. Have a good night.